It was just another night on the job for the taxi driver, long hours, a city buzzing with life, and endless faces hopping in and out of the back seat. He wasn't expecting anything unusual when a man flagged him down on a quiet street. Dressed casually, with a hood pulled over his head, the passenger looked like any other late-night traveler. He had no luggage, no apparent destination in mind, just a simple request to be taken across town. Asa. They drove through the city. The driver struck up a conversation, as he often did. The stranger was polite, his voice oddly familiar, but the driver couldn't quite place it. They talked about life, dreams, and the little surprises that make each day unpredictable. The man listened more than he spoke, nodding along to the driver's stories about his family, the struggles of making ends meet, and the kindness he tried to show to every passenger who stepped into his car. Then came the moment that changed everything. When they finally reached the destination, the man reached for his wallet, only to pause. A look of hesitation crossed his face. Before he could say anything, the driver simply smiled and waved it off. "It's on me," he said. "Everyone needs a little kindness sometimes." What the driver didn't realize was that this wasn't just any passenger. This was someone millions of people recognized, someone whose face was plastered on movie posters and TV screens. But instead of revealing his identity right away, the stranger simply grinned, shook the driver's hand, and stepped out of the car. It wasn't until moments later, when the driver saw something unbelievable, that he realized just how life-changing that simple act of kindness would be. As the taxi pulled away, the driver glanced in his rearview mirror, watching the mysterious passenger disappear into the night. Something about the encounter lingered in his mind. Maybe it was the familiarity of the man's voice, or the way he carried himself, as if he was used to being watched but didn't want to be noticed. The driver shook his head, brushing off the thought. It wasn't the first time he had given someone a free ride. Life had taught him that kindness had a way of coming back around, though he never expected anything in return. A few minutes later, as he waited at a red light, his phone buzzed with a notification. He didn't usually check his phone while driving, but something compelled him to take a quick glance. His heart nearly stopped. A photo had just been posted online, an image of his taxi, parked exactly where he had dropped off the stranger. But it wasn't the car that caught his attention. It was the man standing beside it, smiling and waving at the camera. The caption sent a chill down his spine. "Some people still believe in kindness. Thank you to the taxi driver who reminded me tonight that the world still has good people." The post had already begun to gain traction, comments flooding in, people trying to figure out who the driver was. But what really shook him was the name attached to the account. The stranger he had just given a free ride to wasn't just some random guy. He was one of the biggest movie stars in the world. The driver's hands tightened around the steering wheel. He had unknowingly just crossed paths with someone whose face was known everywhere, and yet, in that brief ride, he had treated him like any other passenger. No cameras, no expectations, just a simple act of generosity. But now, his anonymous good deed was out in the open, and the city was waking up to it. Meanwhile, across town, the actor sat in his hotel room, watching the reactions unfold. He hadn't planned to post anything, but something about the driver's sincerity had struck him. For years, he had lived in a world where people recognized him before they even knew him, where conversations always carried an unspoken weight, either admiration, expectation, or an angle. But tonight had been different. Tonight, he had been just another traveler in need of a ride, and for the first time in a long time, someone had helped him without knowing or caring who he was. But what started as a quiet, heartfelt post quickly spiraled into something much bigger. The internet was relentless. People were determined to find the taxi driver, to turn his story into headlines, to celebrate the simple humanity of his gesture. Reporters began calling taxi companies, trying to track down the car from the blurry reflections in the photos. Strangers speculated about his identity, some even making up details about his life. The driver had no idea how fast things were moving until his phone wouldn't stop ringing. Friends, family, even passengers from past rides started messaging him, asking if he had seen the post. At first, he laughed it off, but the more the messages poured in, the more uneasy he felt. He had never wanted attention. He had no interest in going viral. He had only done what he thought was right. Then came the knock at his door. Imagine walking past a homeless man on the street, barely giving him a second glance. Now, picture that same man choosing to give away the little he has to a complete stranger. What if that simple act of kindness set off a chain of events that would change both of their lives forever? On a cold evening, as the city buzzed with people rushing home, a man sitting on the sidewalk noticed a young woman struggling with her purse. She had just dropped her wallet, and before she could react, someone had snatched it and disappeared into the crowd. Panic washed over her face. She had no cash, no ID, nothing. While others walked past too busy or indifferent to help, the homeless man did something no one expected. He reached into his own tattered coat, pulled out a crumpled $20 bill, likely all he had, and pressed it into her hand. The woman hesitated, stunned by his generosity. "I can't take this," she said, shaking her head. But he simply smiled. "You need it more than I do right now." What neither of them knew was that this moment would lead to something far greater than either could imagine. Because hidden in their past was a connection neither of them saw coming, one that would soon be revealed in the most unexpected way. Stay with us, because this story is about to take a turn that will leave you speechless. The woman clutched the worn $20 bill in her trembling fingers, her mind racing. She had never expected kindness to come from someone who had so little. The weight of the situation pressed down on her. Without her wallet, she had no way to get home, no way to even buy a meal. Yet here was this man, giving her his last bit of money as if it meant nothing to him. She swallowed hard, torn between gratitude and guilt. "I'll pay you back," she promised. I need to figure things out." The man only nodded. "Just take care of yourself," he said, before turning his gaze back to the busy sidewalk, as if retreating into the invisibility he had grown used to. But the woman couldn't just walk away. Something about him seemed familiar, though she couldn't place why. His voice, his eyes, there was something there, something just out of reach in her memory. She took a deep breath and made a decision. "Can I buy you something to eat?" she asked. He hesitated, glancing at her, then at the money still in her hand. "You don't have to do that." "I know," she said, already stepping toward a nearby diner. "But I want to." The man followed reluctantly, and together they slipped into the warm glow of the small restaurant. The scent of fresh coffee and sizzling food filled the air, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he felt like a regular person again. They took a seat in the corner, and as the woman ordered a meal for them both, she studied him, trying to piece together the feeling gnawing at her. Between bites of food, the man finally spoke. "What's your name?" She hesitated for a fraction of a second before answering. He nodded, staring down at his plate. "I used to know someone with that name," he said softly. "A long time ago." The words sent a strange chill through her, but before she could ask anything, the diner door swung open, and a man in a dark coat stepped inside, scanning the room. The woman's heart nearly stopped. She recognized him instantly. The thief. The one who had taken her wallet. She grabbed the homeless man's arm. "That's him," she whispered urgently. His eyes flicked toward the man, and something flashed across his face: recognition. Not just as the thief, but as someone from his past. Someone he had known. The tension in the air thickened as the thief locked eyes with them, realizing he had been spotted. He turned on his heel and bolted out the door, disappearing into the night. The woman's pulse pounded. "We have to do something," she said. But the homeless man looked shaken, his hands clenched into fists. "I know him," he murmured. She stared at him. "What?" His voice was hoarse. "That man. He used to be my friend." The revelation sent a shock through her, but before she could process it, the man stood abruptly. "Stay here," he said, pushing away from the table. "Wait, where are you going?" He didn't answer. He was already out the door, vanishing into the same darkness that had swallowed the thief. The woman sat frozen, staring at the empty doorway where the homeless man had just disappeared. The warmth of the diner seemed to fade around her, the flickering neon lights outside casting eerie shadows against the windows. What had just happened? Her mind raced with questions, and 1,000 thoughts collided in her head. How could he know the thief? Why hadn't he told her? And why had he left so suddenly without explaining anything? The world outside the diner seemed to slow down, as if everything was suspended in time, waiting for something to give. She took a deep breath and tried to calm herself, but her hands were trembling. She couldn't just sit here and do nothing. Hey, aren't you that guy? At first he tried to ignore it, focusing on his work like nothing had changed. But it had changed. A call came in from a local news station, then another from a talk show, offering him a spot on their segment. Companies reached out, suggesting sponsorship deals or partnerships. It was overwhelming, and no matter how much he tried to convince himself that things would settle down, they didn't. Finally, after another long shift of dodging questions and sidestepping attention, he pulled out the card the actor had given him and sent a text. "I think I need some advice." The response came almost immediately. "Let's meet." They agreed on a quiet cafe, away from the usual crowd. When the driver walked in, the actor was already there, baseball cap low over his eyes, sipping a coffee like he wasn't one of the most recognizable faces in the world. "I was starting to wonder if you'd ever call," the actor said with a small smile as the driver sat down. The driver let out a chuckle. "Yeah, well, I'm stubborn. So, I gathered." The actor leaned forward. "Tell me what's going on." The driver hesitated before sighing. "I don't know what to do. People keep reaching out, wanting interviews, wanting me to do aids, even book deals like I'm some kind of overnight sensation. But I was just doing my job." He shook his head. "I didn't do anything special." The actor tilted his head. "That's where you're wrong. The world is full of people chasing fame, trying to get attention. But you? You showed kindness with no expectation of anything in return. People aren't responding to the ride itself. They're responding to you." The words hung in the air. The driver had never thought of it that way. He had spent so much time trying to push the attention away that he hadn't stopped to consider what it meant. "So what do I do?" he finally asked. The actor sat back, thinking for a moment. "That depends. Do you want to disappear back into normal life? Or do you want to use this for something bigger?" The driver frowned. "Like what?" "Well," the actor said, tapping his fingers against his cup, "there are a lot of ways you could take this. You could use the attention to highlight stories of other everyday heroes. Start a platform that shares acts of kindness. Or maybe even a foundation, something that helps people who are struggling, just like you said in the car that night." The driver blinked. "A foundation? Why not? People want to support someone they believe in. And right now, they believe in you." The idea felt too big, too unreal. But as they sat there talking, the more it started to make sense. He had always wanted to help people, but he had never had the means to do more than offer small acts of kindness when he could. Now, for the first time, he had an opportunity to do something bigger. By the time they left the cafe, the driver's mind was spinning with possibilities. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew one thing: he wasn't going to waste this moment. Over the next few weeks, things moved faster than he could have imagined. With the actor's guidance, he set up a project focused on helping struggling workers, taxi drivers, delivery workers, anyone putting in long hours just to make ends meet. Donations started pouring in from people who had followed his story, businesses offered support, and suddenly, he found himself at the center of something much larger than himself. And yet, through it all, he stayed the same. He still drove his taxi, still picked up passengers, still had quiet conversations with strangers. Only now, every ride felt a little different. People recognized him, not as a celebrity, but as someone who had reminded them that kindness still mattered. One night, as he pulled up to a curb to pick up a passenger, he glanced at his phone. A new message had just come in from the actor. "You made the right choice." The driver smiled, tucking his phone away as the passenger slid into the back seat. "Rough night?" he asked, just like he always did. The passenger let out a tired sigh. Yeah. Feels like the world's moving too fast, you know? The driver met the man's eyes in the mirror and smiled. Yeah, he said. But sometimes, all it takes is one good moment to change everything. And with that, he pulled away from the curb, heading toward another destination, another story waiting to unfold.